The spoon froze midair when the stranger saw the child flinch. Not from heat, from fear. In a quiet corner of a roadside café, one small moment exposed a truth so painful it would shatter everything the man thought he understood about love, sacrifice, and what it truly means to be a parent. The café was crowded, noisy with clinking cups and half-finished conversations, but Daniel noticed the child immediately. He didn't know why. Maybe it was the way the boy sat too still, or how his eyes followed every movement of the man feeding him. The father held a spoonful of food, his hand firm and patient. "Eat," he muttered. The child obeyed, swallowing quickly, his shoulders tense like he was bracing for something worse. Daniel tried to look away. It wasn't his business. Parents struggled. Kids were difficult. He reminded himself of that as he stirred his coffee. But then the boy flinched again, this time when the spoon lightly touched his lip. That wasn't normal. Daniel felt a familiar tightening in his chest, a feeling he had spent years trying to ignore. He watched as the father sighed loudly, frustration etched into his face. "Why do you always make this hard?" The man snapped, not shouting, but sharp enough to cut. The child whispered, "I'm sorry," so softly it barely existed. Something broke inside Daniel. He remembered that tone, that silence after it, the way apologies became survival tools. His own childhood memories surfaced uninvited, meals eaten quickly, fear disguised as obedience. The stranger feeding his child didn't look cruel. He looked tired, worn down. But Daniel had learned the hard truth long ago. Pain doesn't always come from monsters. Sometimes it comes from people who think they're doing their best. And sometimes the most dangerous wounds are the ones no one notices. Daniel told himself to finish his coffee and leave. That's what sensible adults did. Minded their own lives, avoided scenes that didn't belong to them. But his eyes kept drifting back to the table. The boy couldn't have been more than 6. His legs didn't reach the floor, feet swinging nervously, hands folded tight in his lap, as if he were afraid they might do something wrong. The father checked his phone between bites, irritation growing with every pause. "You're too slow," he muttered again. "If you don't eat, we're done." The threat hung in the air, heavy and invisible. Daniel noticed the bruising darkness under the boy's eyes. Exhaustion didn't belong on a face that young. When the child coughed, covering his mouth instinctively, the father rolled his eyes. "Drink after," he said, unmoved. A memory hit Daniel like a wave. His own father's voice. The rules. The punishments disguised as discipline. Back then, he had believed it was normal. He had believed love was earned by obedience. He clenched his jaw. The child's gaze flickered to Daniel for just a second, not asking for help. Children like that never do. It was something quieter. Recognition, like seeing someone who might understand. That look stayed with Daniel longer than it should have. He wondered how many people had already noticed and looked away. How many had chosen comfort over conscience? Daniel stood up slowly, heart pounding. He didn't know what he was going to say. He only knew one thing. If he walked out now, he'd be abandoning more than a stranger's child. He'd be abandoning the child he once was. "Excuse me," Daniel said gently, stopping beside the table. His voice surprised even himself. It didn't shake. The father looked up, startled, irritation flashing in his eyes. "Yes." Daniel gestured toward the boy. "I couldn't help noticing. He seems a bit overwhelmed. Kids sometimes eat better when they're not rushed." The silence that followed was sharp. The father straightened. "Are you telling me how to raise my son?" The boy's shoulders tensed instantly. Daniel raised his hands calmly. "No, just offering kindness. Parenting is hard." For a moment, Daniel thought the man might explode. Instead, he laughed, short and humorless. "You think I don't know that?" he said. "You think I enjoy this?" The words weren't defensive. They were tired, heavy. The boy stared at his plate. Daniel hesitated, then pulled out the empty chair beside them. I grew up with a father who thought pressure made boys strong, he said quietly. It didn't. It just made me scared. The father's expression shifted, something between anger and discomfort. You don't know us, the man snapped. Daniel nodded. You're right. I don't. But I know that look. He glanced at the child. And I know what it costs later. The father's grip on the spoon tightened. For the first time, the boy looked confused, not frightened, like something unfamiliar had entered the room. Protection. The cafe noise returned slowly, but the moment stayed suspended, fragile and dangerous. Daniel had crossed a line he couldn't uncross, and deep down, he sensed the truth waiting beneath the surface was far more painful than any argument. The father pushed his chair back slightly, exhaling hard. You think I'm hurting him? He asked, voice slower now. Not loud, not angry, defensive in a quieter, more dangerous way. Daniel chose his words carefully. I think you're repeating something you learned, he said, even if you promised yourself you wouldn't. That landed. The man's eyes flickered, not toward Daniel, but inward. The spoon clinked against the plate as he set it down. The boy looked up, startled by the sudden stillness. He needs to learn discipline, the father said, but the conviction was thinner now. The world doesn't care about feelings. Daniel nodded slowly. That's what my father said too. He was wrong. The boy's gaze moved between them, confusion and hope warring in his expression. The father swallowed. You don't know what it's like, he muttered, doing this alone. His mother. He stopped himself. That pause said everything. Daniel felt the truth forming, heavy and inevitable. She's gone, he said softly. Not a question. The father didn't answer. His silence did. The child's hands trembled slightly. Daniel leaned forward. I'm sorry, he said, for both of you. Something cracked. The father rubbed his face, exhaustion finally winning. I'm all he has, he whispered, and I'm failing. The words weren't meant for Daniel. They were confessions. And in that moment, Daniel understood the real danger wasn't cruelty. It was unhealed grief masquerading as strength. The boy finally spoke. Daddy, he said quietly, I can eat. The father looked at him like he was seeing him for the first time, not as a responsibility, not as a problem, but as a fragile human being carrying more fear than a child ever should. Daniel stood slowly. I didn't come here to judge, he said. I came because I recognized pain, and because sometimes someone stepping in can stop a cycle before it hardens. The father's eyes filled, though no tears fell. What if it's too late? He asked. Daniel shook his head. It rarely is. The father picked up spoon again, but this time, his hand shook. He waited. Take your time, he said to his son, voice softer than before. The boy hesitated, then took a bite. No flinch. Daniel felt something loosen inside his chest. As he walked back to his table, he knew this wasn't the end. Not even close. Some truths didn't shatter instantly. They cracked slowly. And sometimes, those cracks were exactly where healing began. Daniel didn't leave the cafe right away. He sat quietly, pretending to check his phone, but his attention never drifted far from the table behind him. The father, Ethan, Daniel later learned, fed his son more slowly now, each movement cautious, as if afraid of doing something wrong. The boy relaxed little by little, shoulders lowering, breaths evening out. It was a small change, but Daniel knew how rare those moments were. After a while, Ethan looked up again. I'm not a bad father, he said suddenly, not meeting Daniel's eyes. I just don't know how to do this alone. Daniel turned toward him fully. Most people don't, he replied. They just pretend they do. Ethan laughed weakly. His mom used to feed him. She had patience, endless patience. His voice faltered. After she died, everything changed. I thought being firm would keep things from falling apart. Daniel felt the weight of those words settle between them. Grief didn't disappear. It leaked into everything, shaping behavior, sharpening tempers, hollowing hearts. My father lost his job when I was 7, Daniel said quietly. He lost himself with it. I spent years thinking his anger was love. Ethan's jaw tightened. And was it? Daniel shook his head. No, it was fear that never healed. The boy looked up again, listening, absorbing more than anyone realized. Ethan stared at his hands. I don't want him growing up afraid of me. Daniel met his eyes. Then this moment matters more than you think. The boy finished his meal slowly, carefully, like someone learning it was safe to exist without rushing. Ethan wiped his mouth gently, an awkward tenderness in the gesture, as if kindness were a language he was relearning word by word. Daniel watched, heart heavy and hopeful at the same time. My name's Daniel, he said softly. Ethan, the father replied, and this is Leo. Leo looked at Daniel, curiosity replacing fear. You talk quiet, he said. Daniel smiled. That's because loud doesn't always mean strong. Leo considered this deeply, then nodded, as if storing it away for later. Ethan exhaled slowly. I hear my father's voice when I talk to him, he admitted, even when I don't want to. He swallowed. I hated that voice. Daniel leaned back. That's how cycles work. They convince us pain is tradition. Ethan rubbed his eyes. What if I mess him up anyway? Daniel's response came without hesitation. You will. Every parent does. He paused. The difference is whether you notice, and whether you choose repair over pride. Leo reached for his father's hand suddenly. Ethan froze, then held it. Daniel felt his chest tighten. Children always knew when something shifted. I wish someone had interrupted my father, Ethan whispered, before it became normal. Daniel nodded. Sometimes strangers do what families can't. Outside, the afternoon light softened. Inside, something old and heavy loosened its grip, just enough to breathe. They talked longer than Daniel expected. About small things at first, school, favorite foods, how Leo loved drawing animals with oversized hearts. Then slowly, inevitably, the conversation turned darker. There are days I wake up angry, Ethan confessed. Not at him. At life. At the fact that she's gone and I'm still here, pretending I know what I'm doing. Daniel listened without interrupting. Grief needed space more than advice. I catch myself wanting control, Ethan continued, because everything else feels out of control. Daniel nodded. Fear loves structure. It mistakes it for safety. Leo sat on the floor now, drawing with a crayon from his backpack. He held it up proudly. A crooked lion with gentle eyes. That's you, Leo said to Ethan. Ethan's breath caught. Why a lion? Because lions protect, Leo said simply. Daniel looked away, blinking hard. Ethan knelt beside his son. I'm sorry if I scare you sometimes. Leo frowned. You're not scary. You're just sad. The honesty hit harder than any accusation. Ethan pulled Leo into his chest, holding him tightly. I don't want you growing up afraid to speak, he whispered. I don't want to be the reason you flinch. Daniel stood. Then keep listening when he tells you who you are. Ethan looked up. Thank you for stopping. Daniel shook his head gently. Thank you for not pushing past. When they finally stood to leave, the cafe felt different, quieter, lighter. Ethan hesitated near the door. I don't know how to fix everything, he said, but I know I don't want to break him. Daniel placed a hand on his shoulder. That intention alone changes the ending. Leo waved shyly. Bye, quiet man. Daniel smiled. Bye, brave kid. As they stepped outside, Daniel remained behind, watching through the window as Ethan crouched to Leo's height, speaking softly, listening closely, the way fathers were supposed to. Daniel sat back down, heart aching in a familiar way. He thought of all the versions of himself that never got an interruption, all the meals eaten in silence, all the apologies whispered to no one. You can't save every child, he thought, but sometimes You can stop one moment from becoming a lifetime. The truth hadn't shattered Ethan. It had cracked him open. And in that opening, something gentler had begun to grow. Daniel finished his cold coffee and stood, carrying with him the quiet certainty that kindness, timed just right, could rewrite stories before they hardened into scars. That night, Daniel lay awake replaying the scene. Leo's flinch, Ethan's confession, the way grief disguised itself as authority. He realized something unsettling. How easily he could have stayed silent. How often the world rewarded not noticing. Across the city, Ethan tucked Leo into bed. "I love you," he said, softer than he ever had. Leo smiled sleepily. "I know." Ethan stayed longer than usual, sitting beside the bed, promising himself this wouldn't be a one-time change. Healing wasn't a moment. It was a practice. Daniel stared at the ceiling, thinking of his own father, long gone, and the conversation they never had, the apology that never came, the child he had been. Some truths shattered people. Others saved them. All it took was one stranger willing to notice fear instead of ignoring it, and one parent brave enough to listen. Change didn't arrive all at once. It never did. For Ethan, it crept in quietly, during mornings when impatience rose before the sun, and evenings when exhaustion sat heavy on his chest. There were moments he still felt his voice tighten, still felt control reaching for him, like an old habit. But now, there was Leo's face in his mind. That flinch he couldn't forget. One afternoon, Leo spilled juice across the table. The sound alone made Ethan's jaw tense. His first instinct surged forward, sharp words, frustration ready to spill. Leo froze, eyes wide, breath shallow. Ethan stopped. He saw it then. Not the mess. The fear. "It's okay," Ethan said, forcing the words past his throat. His voice shook, but it stayed low. "We'll clean it together." Leo blinked. "You're not mad?" Ethan knelt beside him, wiping the juice slowly. "I was, but I don't want to be anymore." That night, Ethan sat alone after Leo fell asleep, hands buried in his hair. He realized something terrifying and freeing at the same time. He wasn't fighting his son. He was fighting grief. Fighting the version of himself that thought pain was discipline. And for the first time since his wife died, Ethan allowed himself to cry. Not quietly, not in shame, but openly. Healing wasn't about perfection. It was about choosing differently when it mattered most. Daniel didn't expect to see them again. Life rarely offered clean follow-ups. But a week later, at the same café, he heard a familiar laugh, small, unguarded. Leo stood near the counter, proudly holding a cookie. Ethan followed, calmer, lighter somehow. Daniel felt a tightness in his chest. "Quiet man," Leo called, waving. Ethan smiled sheepishly. "We come here now," he said. "It reminds me slow down." They sat together briefly. Leo talked excitedly about school, about drawing lions and superheroes who didn't yell. Daniel listened, noticing how Ethan waited before speaking, how he watched his son instead of his phone. "It's still hard," Ethan admitted. "Some days I fail. But now, I apologize." Daniel nodded. "That's how trust grows back." Ethan hesitated. "I used to think being strong meant never breaking." Daniel replied softly. "Sometimes strength is letting your child see you heal." Leo climbed onto Ethan's lap without hesitation. That small act said everything. Daniel realized then that interruptions didn't just stop harm. They planted possibility, the kind that changed futures quietly. As they parted ways, Ethan said, "You didn't just help Leo. You helped me see myself clearly." Daniel smiled gently. That's all any of us really need. That night, Leo asked a question that made Ethan pause mid-story. "Daddy, are you still sad about Mommy?" Ethan swallowed. He had avoided this question, afraid it would break them both. But running from truth had already cost too much. "Yes," he said honestly. "I am." Leo nodded. "Me too." Ethan pulled him closer. "It's okay to be sad. It doesn't mean we stop loving each other. Leo rested his head against Ethan's chest. You don't scare me anymore. The words hit harder than any accusation ever could. Ethan closed his eyes, breathing slowly, memorizing the moment. He realized then that fear didn't disappear when pain ended. It disappeared when safety arrived. Later alone, Ethan looked at an old photo of his wife, smiling beside Leo. I'm trying, he whispered. I'm learning. He understood now that grief demanded expression, not suppression. That love required gentleness, not control. Across the city, Daniel sat by his window, thinking of the boy he once was. The meals eaten in silence, the fear mistaken for respect. He wondered how many moments could have been different if one person had noticed. He didn't feel regret anymore. He felt resolve. Sometimes healing echoed outward, touching lives you never meant to change. Months passed. Leo grew louder, freer. He laughed without checking for reactions. He spoke without rehearsing apologies. His drawings changed too, fewer sharp lines, more open space. At a school event, Ethan watched Leo run toward him after a performance, arms wide, fearless. Ethan knelt instinctively, catching him in a hug. I wasn't scared, Leo whispered proudly. Ethan smiled, eyes burning. I know. Later that evening, Ethan caught his reflection in the mirror. He looked different. Softer. Not weaker, truer. He realized something profound. Breaking cycles didn't erase the past. It honored it by refusing to repeat it. Daniel received a message that night, a simple photo. Leo and Ethan smiling at the cafe. No words. Daniel stared at it for a long time. The truth hadn't shattered Ethan. It had freed him. And Leo would grow up believing love felt safe. That alone made every uncomfortable moment worth it. Years later, Leo wouldn't remember the cafe clearly, but he would remember how safety felt, how his voice mattered, how love didn't require fear. That was the real legacy. Ethan would still grieve. Some losses never left. But grief no longer drove his hands or his words. Love did. Daniel would carry that day quietly, like a reminder stitched into his conscience. That noticing mattered. That speaking up could change more than one life. Some truths shattered people. Others healed generations. And sometimes, all it took was a stranger willing to pause, and a parent brave enough to listen. Leo was 10 when he finally understood what had changed. It wasn't something anyone announced. It lived in the small things, in how his father listened without interrupting, how anger no longer filled the room like smoke, how silence felt safe instead of dangerous. One evening, while they washed dishes together, Leo dropped a plate. It shattered loudly across the floor. He froze. For just a second, the old fear returned. Ethan's heart pounded. The moment tested him without warning. His chest tightened, instinct whispering sharply in his ear. But he breathed. Slowly, deliberately. It's okay, Ethan said. Step back. I don't want you to get cut. Leo stared, stunned. They cleaned the mess together, barefoot on cold tiles, talking about school and weekend plans. Later that night, Leo realized something simple and powerful. Mistakes didn't cost him love anymore. Ethan sat alone afterward, hands shaking. He knew how close he'd come to repeating history. Change wasn't permanent without vigilance. Healing required presence. He whispered a quiet thank you. To the stranger who had noticed, to the child who had trusted him again, and to himself for choosing differently. That broken plate became something sacred, proof that fear could end. Daniel often wondered how many moments like that cafe scene passed unnoticed every day. How many children learned to shrink? How many parents confused control with care? The thought used to exhaust him. Now it fueled him. He volunteered at a local community center, mentoring young fathers navigating loss, stress, and inherited anger. He never lectured. He listened. One evening, a man said, I don't want my kid to flinch when I walk in. Daniel felt a familiar ache. Then you're already further than you think. Across town, Ethan attended one of those sessions without knowing Daniel led it. When they recognized each other, neither spoke for a moment. Ethan smiled first. "You changed our lives." Daniel shook his head. "You did the hard part." They talked afterward, sharing quiet victories and honest failures. Leo played nearby, laughing freely, unaware of the weight his presence carried. Daniel realized then that healing wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself. It echoed, from one stranger to one family, from one moment of courage to a lifetime of safety. And the world shifted, slightly and visibly. But forever day as Leo grew older, he asked questions about his mother, about sadness, about why people hurt each other when they loved them. Ethan answered honestly, never hiding behind silence again. "One day," Leo said, "I want to be a dad like you." Ethan swallowed hard. "I hope you're even better." Leo smiled. "I will be, because I won't be scared." That night, Ethan cried, not from pain, but from relief. Daniel, too, faced his past more gently now. He no longer carried only resentment. He carried understanding. His father hadn't been evil, just broken. That didn't excuse the harm, but it freed Daniel from it. Some truths shattered illusions. Others rebuilt foundations. Leo's life would never include fear disguised as love. His childhood would be loud with questions, safe with mistakes, rich with forgiveness. And that was how cycles ended. Not with blame, but with awareness. Years later, Leo would sit in cafes of his own, watching parents and children, noticing small things. He would feel a pull to kindness without knowing why. Ethan would grow older, softer, proud not of perfection, but of repair. Daniel would keep noticing. The truth that once shattered a man became the truth that saved a family. Pain didn't vanish, but it transformed. And that transformation mattered. Not all heroes raised their voices. Some simply refused to look away. One moment, one stranger, one child who never learned to flinch again. That was enough. Sometimes the smallest acts of courage change generations. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to like, subscribe, and join our Heart Angels family, where compassion is noticed, stories are felt, and healing always begins with kindness.